Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. Good afternoon, ladies. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We're good. Let's introduce you to the audience. Krista, can you start for us, please?
Yeah. My name is Krista Laing. My pronouns are she and her. I am running for CUPE Ontario Secretary-Treasurer at the 2026 CUPE Ontario Convention. I'm a municipal worker. I come from Oshawa, Ontario, which is a Labour town. And I currently am the chair of the CUPE Ontario Municipal Workers Committee. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Katherine.
Hi, Jessa.
Introduce yourself to folks who don't know who you are.
My name is Katherine Grzejszczak. I come out of the municipal sector as well, out of paramedic services. I have been active in CUPE since approximately 2012 and have held elected positions at the local level or at the Ontario level since that time. I was president of my local, a large municipal composite local, for 6 years. And for the last 2 years, I sat on the CUPE Ontario Executive Board as a member at large, and I am now offering for the position of third vice president.
Well, in both of your intros, you've alluded to what we're going to talk about. There are elections coming up for CUPE Ontario. Folks might have already sensed that this was happening because Fred Hahn, one of the most notable union leaders in Ontario, if not the country, announced he would not be seeking re-election as president. He recently lost an election at the National Convention for his vice president position. I think not everyone on the left, I hate making such bold statements, but I feel like with this I don't know many people who are politically engaged who didn't see what Fred Hahn went through in the last 2.5 years in terms of facing smear campaigns and other mounted opposition. And he's paid the price. So maybe folks weren't surprised that Fred's not going to be seeking re-election, but they do want to know what that means for CUPE moving forward. I think he's been there so long. He's meant so much to what seems to be a very progressive union in Ontario. We like to think that we've got some good unions in Ontario, and I feel like we've got some awful ones like LaUNA, not to name drop anybody. But what did you read? And what should everyone else have gotten from Fred's decision to not run again, and what that means for the state of your union?
I think reading through his letter, it was powerful. The work that he has done for our union is it's hard to put that dedication and that time. That man never stops. I just want to start with that. Spend a full day with Fred Hahn and you will be exhausted. It's unreal the love that he has for this union. And I think when you're out in front and you're the man in charge, you, like you said, you are the figure that wears everything that we do as a union. Everything that we decide through resolutions. And you are that figurehead, and that's draining on a person. I got to witness at AMO, David Piccini attack the man, which was a clip that went viral, which was unreal. And I don't know how someone could have handled that other than Fred. Wakes up the next day, gets going for his members, for what's right. It's going to... his departure is going to leave a big hole. He was someone that I looked up to. I still look up to. And not just for his leadership, but I think the fact that I would constantly learn something from Fred as well. I think when it came to Fred, he really embodied struggles of all of our members and tried to put that to the forefront. And it's going to be a huge blow for us as a union, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, like Fred has, I would tend to agree with everything that Krista has said in terms of his incredible leadership of this union for, I would say, the last 10 or 12 years that Fred has held the position of president. And I think he took over from Sid Ryan. So there was a lot of continuity, I think, politically between those two folks. There's no doubt that he carries a lot of weight. I mean, I think it was really brutal watching him get attacked continuously for 2.5 years. I think that to me speaks to just how afraid the employer class, ruling class, however you want to call them, are of unions and the potential that workers actually have to push back on some of the changes that we're seeing in society. Because if the union was irrelevant and if what Fred was saying and doing politically in terms of supporting trans youth or solidarity with Palestine, if what he was doing was irrelevant, he wouldn't have faced these attacks, right? And I think that speaks to the power that workers have, whether we are actively really flexing and using that power or not. I think there's incredible potential for workers and the union being able to direct where society is going.
Moving forward, like his departure, yes, it leaves a gap, but then it leaves a gap for activists that are outspoken and have the same values and principles to continue on that work as well. And realize that, like, yes, we are governed by a president at CUPE Ontario, but there are members that share the same values and the same beliefs, and it's our turn to step up and keep bringing that to the forefront.
Like, look, things have really changed, I would say, politically in the last 2 years. There's been an incredible shift to the right within society in general. And, for all the things that we can say that are negative about Fred leaving, it's also an opportunity for the entire CUPE membership to have a discussion about what do we want to see this union being and doing on a go-forward basis, given that the political situation that we're in today, I think, is so different than it was just a few years ago. Certainly, like night and day before COVID happened, right? So I think there's opportunities there. And like, honestly, I just wish Fred the best of retirement. I know he's going to continue being active and supporting CUPE and our members. I know we're going to see his face at demonstrations without a doubt. But I also wish that, he has the time to spend with his partner, Carrie, and that he enjoys some time to himself after years of just giving and giving and giving to CUPE and to our entire membership.
I imagine it's difficult time for him to step away as well, knowing how the situation CUPE's in, what situation the public sector is in particular. I know we're seeing a historical acts of austerity coming down from Carney's government. You folks have been up against Doug Ford, notorious for his attack on the public sector for years. So this is absolutely a pivotal moment in politics, especially as it pertains to labor. What is the strength of CUPE right now and the public sector in Ontario after so many years under Ford? We spoke to student unions last week, right? And they talked about the actual damage and the momentum that was lost, sometimes having to face just attack after attack, loss after loss. So where's CUPE at right now?
I think the strength is that we are seeing members publicly speaking out and fighting and organizing and taking action in ways that I have never seen since I've been active in the union. And I think that's always where our strength comes from. there is no strength in a union outside of the members. And it's been so inspiring to see, like, you know, despite all of these public like attacks that union leaders face, and also being disciplined by employers for speaking publicly, which there has been an increase of without a doubt. And yet union elected officers at the local level continue speaking out and saying, hey, like, this isn't right. We can't provide the services that we are here literally to provide, right? Taking strike action in numbers that, again, I have not seen since I've been active for the last, 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm from the municipal sector, like I mentioned earlier, and the ratification votes that have been turned down is something that I think we're seeing in record numbers. Like, workers are willing to go on strike. They want to be engaged, they want to be active, and they want to fight back. I think there's a real anger from the working class throughout Ontario about privatization, underfunding, workload, and some of that organizing is a little bit uneven and siloed by sector or region, but I do think there's a real potential for worker power here. It's just not being like fully coordinated. But I think that's kind of where we're at in Ontario. Workers are frustrated with this government. They are realizing they have the power, and now it's just about engaging them and coordinating them.
Can you explain a little bit more about what those ratification votes mean for labor politics, for internal politics? We know they're getting a bad deal from employers all the time, but what's the significance of having workers feeling enough power to make those kinds of votes?
Yeah, I think it's, in our sector, it's kind of unprecedented. Like, municipal jobs were this like golden ticket job where people would just kind of take this vote and take what their bargaining committee and their national staff rep gave to them and be like, well, this is all we can get. And I think what is building out of it is this like anger and this collective action, that it's not enough. And this realization that workers actually have the power to push for more, which for the way we're doing bargaining, we were starting to see a little bit of a change. We're starting to see more open bargaining, more communication with the members to try to bring them into the process, which is kind of alleviating some of those failed ratification votes. But I think that's a good thing. The more we're engaging workers throughout that process, I feel like the more pressure the employer has on them, and they see the power of the collective in that moment.
Yeah, strikes are contagious, right? Like, once workers start seeing that you can actually fight back and you can win, that it's possible, they start feeling that power. And I think Krista's absolutely right. I think people are just saying, like, this isn't good enough anymore. Like, we do really important work and you're not compensating us appropriately for that work. And you're also not hearing our concerns about how to make these services better, because that's also a large part of the union activity that we're seeing is like pushback against like provincial cuts, for example, right? Like, you look at the social services sector where it's not even so much individual employers, it's the funding that comes from the province, which is completely abysmal. And these are some of the lowest paid workers. And we see this aggressive, united, coordinated front on the part of employers to force ratification votes in that sector. Like, this is literally brand new in the last couple of weeks. And workers are turning down those forced ratification votes, obviously with good reason, because the wage increases that are being proposed to them are like 0 and 1%. This is a sector that had their wages frozen with Bill 124. Like, people literally will say, I cannot afford to work in this sector. And so CUPE and OPSU have a campaign to try to work together as unions, which is also something that's really important that I think is something we haven't done well as unions. We separate ourselves into, union by union, right? Like, we see ourselves as CUPE members or as public sector workers, no, we're all actually facing the same attacks, and we're all stronger together if we don't figure out a way to work together across bargaining units, across sectors, across unions, and even with workers who are non-unionized. We will continue to keep losing, and we are not winning right now, right? And that's why you're seeing, I think, this like wave of courage and action, is because people can see and feel that, objectively speaking, we're just not keeping up with the rising cost of living.
When you say pushback in terms of cuts that are happening within the sector, do you mean during the collective bargaining as well as, in the proverbial in the streets? Because I think there's a distinction there, right, where folks are making calls that not just wages and really worker issues. I mean, in the broad sense, we can make the argument that even Palestine is a workers' issue, but I'm talking about the easiest sell to all your workers, right? Like a raise, benefits, job protection. But working battles with the government in terms of fighting back with cuts in the collective bargaining. Is that something you would propose to do more of?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, there's not really that clear of a distinction to me between where like the working conditions of the workers and then the people that they take care of, right? Like, if you're not treating your workers well and you're not compensating them, and that inevitably is, they work in a workplace, right? And that inevitably becomes the service that people who are being cared for by those workers receive, right? If you can't keep staff and there's a constant turnover of staff, right? Like, you're dealing with somebody new every time you access a service. I think the hospital sector is a sector that I really see where, and these are folks that traditionally do not have the right to strike in the hospital sector, but hospitals are so underfunded that they're having to borrow money from private lending institutions and have to pay to borrow that money. Like, this makes absolutely no sense in terms of where are we spending our tax dollars when we're not funding hospitals appropriately. But like, half of the battle is that folks are really struggling as workers because there's not enough of them. They can't deliver the care that the public needs, right? And so these things always go hand in hand, like these massive privatizations that we're seeing of the healthcare system, which is not something new. We've been seeing this for 2 decades at least, if not longer. And now these real moves being made in Alberta to completely privatize healthcare and create a 2-tier system, right? And these are, again, right? So you're seeing workers speaking out about this. They work with the Ontario Health Coalition to raise the issue of privatization and underfunding. And that goes, of course, hand in hand with the wages and the working conditions. So it's all of these things, I think, Jessa, right? This all comes in a package together. It's so difficult to tease out which is which. But yeah, I think we have to be strategic and think about how do you win these fights when it comes to particular sectors, right? Where everybody's separated into these small bargaining units and employers are coordinated, as the example I just gave with what we're seeing with social services, right? Within 2-3 weeks, all of a sudden, all of these employers were forcing ratification votes. They are coordinated. And when we are not, that is where the issue rises.
You folks want to spend some time talking about the other changes, things that would shape up your platform moving forward. I know, you spoke very highly of Fred and his time at CUPE, but I'm sure you've also got ideas about how the union could operate a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think over the last while, I've been involved for a decade, and we've seen unions in general, if you look through union history, we've gone away from member-driven organizing and gone towards servicing administration and centralized decision-making, which sure, it created strong institutions, but weaker day-to-day member engagement. And I think we're finally just coming out of that period. where we need to invest in the rank and file members, and we need to invest in educating those rank and file members. And we've seen, like Katherine touched on, the fragmentation within our union as well, like sectors bargaining separately, locals operating independently, everybody likes their autonomy. We're all facing the same issues. There's a multitude of campaigns out there that are not consistently coordinated, even when the issues are shared: privatization, funding cuts, staffing. So getting folks on the same page to be like, a worker is a worker is a worker. We're a public sector union. The job that a paramedic is doing affects the job of a PSW. The cuts that are affecting a hospital will affect a healthcare worker and a healthcare worker's child. So I think educating the members for sure, and inspiring change from the rank and file. Like, change is going to come from grassroots movements. It always has. It always will. So empowering those people to take leadership positions, and not even formalized leadership positions, but leadership positions in their workplace, in their unit, to just have conversations about this and start educating folks. Because I think people are tired. I think workers are tired. But I think when we're in spaces and where we see the collective powers of workers, like at a rally, I think that inspires people. And we forget that we have so much more in common with each other as workers than we do with CEOs, bosses, or supervisors.
When I look at the platforms that people are putting out, or the way that these elections are being talked about, or even messaging from our union more broadly, I think everybody pretty much is on the same page about what we're facing. But I think the solutions that are being proposed are quite different, right? So, I mean, like, let's be real. We've invested in electoral politics as a solution to workers' issues for quite a while now, right? And you know, like, I can see how that made sense, because until the last few years, workers were not willing to take job action. They were not willing to speak publicly, right? Bargaining did happen behind closed doors, and members didn't really push back on that, right? And things have changed. And so proposing those same solutions, I don't think works any longer. And we really think that I really think the idea of putting class politics forward is something that we have not done as a union. We were just talking about this the other day. So CUPE has a great education program. I don't think we have a single course that talks about class. I don't ever remember taking a course or hearing about a course that talks about class. I know, I'm seeing your face, Jess. How is that even possible, right?
I assumed your union was a den of Marxism. Right? I'm sure Ford thinks that, right?
I assure you it's not. Yeah. So, I think this is why it becomes so easy for everybody to fragment, because people don't have an understanding. I think this is what you were getting at, Krista, is like, we are working class people. We have to go into work every day in order to be able to pay for rent and feed ourselves, right? We have nothing. I have nothing in common with Canadian CEOs or like people that own companies that never have to work a day in their life. Everybody else does the work for them, right? And so this is class, right? And we don't focus enough on that. I think our members don't have a clear understanding of that. And without that clear understanding, it becomes very difficult to propose an effective solution to what's happening. And I think the power is not in electoral politics. Do we ignore electoral politics? No. Right? Like, we have to engage with politicians. We are public sector workers, but to constantly say that the answer is we just have to elect the right people. We just have to elect the right people. Okay, let's look at what's happening in BC, where the NDP was just elected. They're slashing public sector jobs. The last I heard, 10,000 public sector jobs will be cut, right? They're introducing a budget that cuts in the public sector, right? So when I hear that this is the solution, and that's the solution that we have to invest in, I just don't think that realistically that's what we see when we look at the real world, right? Politicians get elected all the time who we campaign for very actively, and then they turn around and do things that are not in our interests as workers. And there's no accountability mechanism. Why? Because we haven't built up our own capacity as members to even hold them accountable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was the government in BC, the NDP government, that put BC GEU out for 8 weeks. So I just wanted to echo what Katherine was saying. Like, no politician is coming in to save us. And we increasingly rely on electoral politics, lobbying, and relationships with government. And we know that, like, can't replace organized workers and the power of organized workers itself. So I just wanted to echo that. Like, I think focusing on the actual capacity of building workers, educating workers, is a more valuable use of time and resources.
You're not going to find me arguing with that point. My grin there was just like, oh, how bad I want to ask them about their union endorsing Abby Lewis as the next NDP leadership. We won't get into that all that much, but CUPE Ontario is known for working very closely with the Ontario NDP, but that's kind of a bold move. I think, we've seen a lot of people make an endorsement one way or the other, but a union to tie themselves to a party so much that they are opining on its leadership race like that is a big signal that they work closely together. And if anyone's been at convention, there's a lot of CUPE resources, time, and political capital when you tie it to a person who might let you down or let the rest of the province down. You are, I think, unnecessarily making these connections for folks that they are somehow with the ruling class, right? Like they're in with the ruling class, and that is a good thing. Absolutely no arguments there. I would love to see some of that change, right? The argument is that you wield so much more power when you aren't beholden to them in any way, when you feel no ways about being able to push back against something like that, right? Sorry, Katherine, you mentioned, did you want to add something there? Did someone took that breath that...
Yeah, I know. I just to add that, like, putting all of the details aside, I think worker power comes from their work in workplaces and shaping that work and stopping that work strategically when it needs to be done. That's where real worker power comes from. And I think when I see folks who go out on strike, like we saw with education workers a few years back, what I heard people talk about is this like incredible feeling of power that they have in those moments where they've collectively walked off the job and are feeling power because they are powerful, right? And it's moments like that I think really like crystallize for me. Do you ever feel that way after you've gone to vote? I don't.
Don't be ridiculous, Katherine.
Like it's and it's that feeling, but that feeling says everything about where workers' power lies. It's in the workplace. It's not at the ballot box.
Katherine, you mentioned you were very gracious, I think, in your answer where you said there's just a range of solutions being proposed. Now, we don't have to name any names or anything like that, but can you give me an idea of what your opposition is going to look like? Is there going to be a move on the right wing to gain some positions at CUPE Ontario's convention? Is the myriad of solutions being proposed all still like, can they be categorized as progressive? Or is there an internal threat that you folks feel like you might be pushing back against? Because, there was a campaign to oust Fred, assuming there's people behind that campaign that might be now interested in this regime change, right? Can we assume it's just going to go, quote unquote, our way?
Like, look, I think it's generally quite a confused situation when I look at it. I think what I'm seeing more than anything is individuals stepping up to run, rather than any kind of coherent political outlook. I would say that's what I see more of, is just, like me as an individual, these are the things that I'm putting forward, or, I've done this for a long time, or I did a good job in my previous position. That's almost the level of, and it's still early, right? Because I think the real discussions are going to happen at convention. But it's hard to even know where the left and the right is within the union sometimes. Like it's because I think there isn't really a clear left, and maybe it's more like there isn't really a clear left, in the sense that I would think of a left, right? And maybe my definition is a little bit different, because I think of the left as existing outside of electoral politics. And I don't think that that's the case for everybody. Like, I think for other folks, they would see the NDP as being left, right? But that can't be the entire plan that we have as a union of what are we doing when we're facing these attacks that frankly I've never seen in my lifetime on the working class and in the case of CUPE, public services in general.
The one thing that this election is highlighting is that there is a huge disconnect from the rank and file workers. And we have a disconnection problem, I think, in our union. We can go up there and we can stand up and be like, we're 290,000 members strong. Well, are we? Are we talking to those rank and file members? Are we working with them, or are we working within a vacuum of elected leaders, right? Are we reaching out into communities and talking to the workers there? I think the stat, I'm going to get the stat wrong, but I think it was 1 in 3 people were and or is a CUPE member. I think I'll get you the actual facts on that. But are we engaging with those people? Do they know they're part of a union? Or are we just engaging with kind of like the upper echelon of elected officials? And I think that's one thing that since I've been elected, I've tried to stomp out. I come from a really small local, we're 240 members. We don't really get the big opportunities to go to conferences and kind of rub elbows with other presidents. It really comes from that rank and file work. So I think I bring a different perspective of that we need to engage with the rank and file, or we won't be powerful in the times ahead. And I think that's what we really need to lean into. So we're seeing folks kind of just put out a resume, right? This is what I've done. This is what I've done. Not this is what I'm going to do. And this is how I'm going to challenge the budget dropping on the 26th, which is probably going to be horrendous for workers. Or how are we going to engage more workers? I'm not really seeing a lot of that through this campaign so far. But like Katherine said, it is early. And I think a lot of the conversations have come up incredibly early, which I think is good in one way, because we can get members involved and people talking. But yeah, there's still so many fights in the meantime of this election period. And that's where I struggle as someone running, because I'm focused on this campaign, but I'm also focused on the work that we're doing with OMERS, the work that we're doing against water privatization as well. So yeah, it's gonna be an interesting couple months, but I think what I'm happy with is that we have strong candidates that are focused on engaging rank and file workers, so we can actually say how large we are and feel it, and feel that worker presence behind us.
Just a clarifying question. You said you have candidates, plural. I have 2 here, obviously, but is that a slate, or is this, like Katherine kind of described, just, a ragtag bunch of friends deciding that we're all going to run, but we can't bother branding ourselves?
Listen, no one likes the slate word.
I know. Sorry.
I think there's folks that, and Katherine, you can interrupt me if I'm wrong, that agree to a certain platform or values, and that we want to bring to other workers, and talk to other workers about it at convention and elevate those ideas as kind of like a running board, I guess, for our union.
Like, look, I think because going back to my other answer, right? Because we don't have solidified politics within the union, part of what we're trying to do is put forward these more like worker-led, more challenging, like more challenge to the employer as opposed to focusing so much on elections. And in putting these ideas forward, like we hope that there will be other folks that are like, hey, yeah, I also think that this is what we need in this moment. So part of this is trying to solidify a group of people. One of the things that I think would be really important for CUPE Ontario to do right now is to hold a series of meetings in different parts of the province to really have an open process of going to locals or groups of locals that are in a geographic area, meeting with the members and saying, look, like this is the political framework of kind of what we're seeing happening in terms of like leadership from CUPE Ontario. But you tell us, what are you actually experiencing in your workplaces? What's happening in this part of the province? And most importantly, what are you willing to do about that? Right? Because I find a lot of the time when we engage with members, we're telling them, like, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan. We're not actually listening and providing a space for members to try to organize themselves and to move forward from that. And there is no way that we will be able to turn this situation around without members coming up with the plan together and figuring out ways to execute that plan. And again, broadening that to include other unions as well, and even non-union workers. So there is so much activity going on. It's a little bit, not uniform, but then we're seeing different battles happening, right? Like in Niagara, where there's a restructuring of the municipality, talk about privatization of water, right? Just like an entire restructuring of Niagara region. Then there's other parts where something different is happening. But how do we start connecting all of that and connecting members so that they feel like they're a part of something bigger and that we do have bigger power? And I think there's one thing that I've consistently heard from CUPE, right? It's like this value on the Jane McAlevey model of organizing, which to me is just like, we need to go talk to the workers and see what the workers want to do. Like that's what I think really needs to happen. And I think CUPE Ontario can provide that in ways that no individual local is going to be able to do. This is to me, this is the reason why we have an Ontario-wide structure of our union, is to be able to do that kind of work.
I wonder, I've never kind of gone through a union election / convention. What you described there, though, sounds like what I would suggest to people do in order to run a campaign before convention, to meet as many locals as possible and base your platform on what these folks are asking. What does your campaign look like? Like, what will you be able to do leading up to the convention? I know a lot happens on the floor and you do most of your work there, but what are you going to do between then and now, other than appear on podcasts, to engage in the way that you're talking about, right? To walk the talk?
I think just talking to members, and it's like, oh my God, stop saying that. But I think talking to as many people one-on-one, and really making them think about this election, think about the state that we're in, proposing those questions to them. Are we prioritizing organizing or administration? Are members expected to participate or just be represented? Do we build capacity before fights or do we scramble during them? And I think putting that in workers' minds and letting that like grassroots organizing go from there. What we've been doing is really just at any opportunity we can, are you a CUPE member? Take a look at this. I'm running for election, and just hopefully letting it go grassroots style. I'm always open to talk to locals as well.
So it sounds just like an NDP election where you don't have access to a membership list, or there's no structured way for you to campaign in the traditional way, the way the municipal, provincial, federal elections go, right? You're given an electoral list, where everybody lives, you knock on their door. You don't need to say, are you a CUPE member? And ideally you'd be given a list. This creates a power imbalance sometimes in other conventions because some people will have more access than others. So I don't know. I just thought maybe you could also give me another idea of just how these campaigns shape up, especially from a grassroots perspective where you might not be able to access as many rooms before the floor, right? Because, that's like a speech. There's a bit of mingling that you can do there, but that's a high pressure, time limited situation versus the months that you have before you. Just curious because folks that are listening are involved in union elections. And if there's anything that you think that you're doing that's going to be more effective or that you have planned that will let you bridge that gap and reach as many people as possible beforehand.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, what I do want to say is I think I kind of caught on to the part where you said, like, walk the walk, right? And I think the work is constant, right? And this is, like, put the election piece aside, right? Like, the work around what's happening in the municipal sector, the work that's being done around our pension plan. There's been issues around the OMERS pension plan, and it's not just municipalities. It's also education workers that are in that pension plan, as well as some social service workers as well, right? Like, that work is continuous and it's continuously being done. And there's, continuous connections that we make with members. I don't know that we're so much talking to them about our elections. That's not right.
You're going to have to at some point.
Yeah, we will. That's true. Right. And this is a difficulty. And this goes back to what, Krista mentioned, is that the average CUPE member doesn't come to convention. Right. And so reaching out to members to talk to them about what's happening in their workplace is not necessarily the same thing as talking to them about an election, because chances are they're not going to be at that convention. Are there, folks that we know that are activists in their locals that we're reaching out to? Absolutely. Right. Like we are having those conversations, but that's not, I wouldn't say, like, embedded in the day-to-day work that we're doing. The day-to-day work is being done, and it's like, I'm not going to tell you I'm going to do something different than I feel like what I've been doing in the union all along, right? Like, I think both of us have always, and I think this is how we kind of click together, right? Is this, like, go talk to the members, bring the presentation to the members, hear what they have to say, create space for workers to organize themselves in these, like, models that we have right now. Like, connect with other organizations that are doing work around, attacks on immigrants that are happening right now, right? Like, because that's the other piece that I don't think we've so much talked about is, like, the international, or the internationalism, if you will, for lack of a better word, understanding, like, that the working class is so much broader than just, again, CUPE members or members of a particular bargaining unit, and that our interests are tied up with like things that are happening internationally, right? Like we're seeing this incredible rise in like war and aggression. And the end effect of that is that we have a federal government that's saying we're going to divert all of this money to basically, build, I don't want to say war munitions, but basically, yeah, to support the war effort and to support the military and to build munitions, right? 5% of the GDP is supposed to go to that. The military budget is being doubled, right? And that is all money that's being taken out of healthcare, out of social services, out of municipal services, right? That money is being taken from us. And this is part of the reason that our healthcare is being privatized and that education workers can't, do their job properly and are dealing with this incredible level of violence and are understaffed. So these things are fundamentally connected. And I think that was the other thing that, we wanted to touch on. And I don't think that other folks are necessarily seeing that as being part of union work, but it is absolutely connected.
It's important to make that point, Katherine. I'm glad you did raise it, especially on the migrant workers and the attacks on immigrants, because even within the Canadian labor sphere, under Trump and the tariff threats and all of that, that elbows up mentality became a very insular project, a very Canadian worker focused campaigns. Even, the CLC made some not very helpful statements into that regard, where folks became, whereas that leaves room to scapegoat migrants, I believe, when we were started talking about taking care of Canadians and Canadians first. Then that leaves a large sector of workers completely unrepresented and worse, right? They become the problem. So is that something you think CUPE could do a little bit better? Because I've seen CUPE work close with migrant rights before. Is that something that you would spend a little bit more resources on?
So I am from Oshawa, and like growing up, you saw a specific situation where we blamed migrant workers from taking away jobs in this community instead of holding the corporation accountable. And I'm grateful for what I've learned from activists like Katherine, and shout out to our last CUPEcast episode where she did a report back on her trip to the Philippines. But I think it is important, and we do need to invest in it because there's no other areas that I can think of where we are having these discussions. I think we're getting flooded by right-wing social media all the time, and this anti-immigrant sentiment is being pushed down our throat. And I think we need to create spaces within our unions to have these conversations and invest in these conversations to just start strengthening class solidarity. Because I think when we do that, and when people are in a room and we're talking about it, some of those misconceptions around migrant workers seem to clear up. And I think like when we do invest in that time and resources, it only strengthens the labor movement as a whole. And labor movement as unionized, non-unionized workers, workers with status, workers without status.
Yeah, and I think it's been so incredible to see some of the self-organizing that these immigrant communities have done through organizations like Najwan Support Network over the years, right? Like, which goes back to showing us that like you can like definitely organize outside of these, effectively actually organize to take on employers and get back unpaid wages outside of a union structure, right? Like that's been so inspiring to see. But yeah, the attack on immigrants that we're witnessing, and I think it is actually like really important to also point out to workers that this happens like clockwork every single time that employing class, again, whatever you want to call them, ruling class, employing class, the economic elites are making your lives worse. You can feel it. And so they want to find a scapegoat so that we are not looking up at them to say who's actually responsible and who needs to be held accountable, because they're taking things away from us, right? And so they want workers fighting amongst each other, whether it's about people's gender identity, whether it's racism, whether it's you don't have immigration status, you come from another country. This is how, employers separate workers and benefit from these separations, because then there actually is no solidarity to fight back in any meaningful way.
I know you've pointed out and reiterated that you have a lot of hope in seeing some patterns with workers, that there have been some victories. But I think for the broader public, times are shit. It's scary politically, economically. I don't think I really need to describe it. We're all feeling it. We all know exactly what I'm talking about. We're not all in unions. Why should we be interested in how CUPE conventions shape up and what this CUPE leadership might look like going forward? How can a strong public sector union change the course of what we're happening right now? I mean, not on their own, but how does that play a role in the project that we've got moving forward? The political revolution our listeners are desperate for.
I think when you look historically, the only times that workers have made serious gains is because we've been incredibly organized and active and actually consciously fighting for those gains in huge numbers. And that is the only force that has won things in the past, contrary to the stories that we get told. These things were never given to us. We fought like hell for them and we won them. And so any union, whether it's CUPE or any other union or any other organization of workers that wants to move things in that direction, I think gives hope that we can rebuild that once again.
Yeah. No, and I think because we are a public sector union, I think there's that connection with when we invest in strong public services, the impact on community and the positive impacts that has on community as well. What we've been trying to do and what I hope to see more with CUPE Ontario is start connecting with community issues as well, because worker issues are community issues. And hopefully people will kind of change that narrative that it's like, oh, that's a public sector union, they only care about the public sector, but realize that when we bargain good wage increases, we raise the floor for workers. Like Katherine said, when we follow through on health and safety issues and we push hard on those, it creates better conditions for other workers. And when we invest in strong public services, it improves our quality of life as residents of Ontario. And I think that's something that I want to lean into, because the underinvestment from this Ford government is killing people, right? With hospital wait times. It's affecting children's education. They're fucking privatizing our fucking water. Fuck. I mean, if now's the time to connect worker issues to community issues, this is the time to do it, right?
And specifically, sorry, I just wanted to touch specifically on water, because I think that does get to part of your question, Jessa. So one thing that I've been so encouraged by is workers understand that their working conditions are the public services that folks receive, right? So seeing water workers who work in the public sector stepping up and saying, I am warning you as somebody who actually does this job, that lives will be lost, costs will go up, and corporations are just going to make a profit while we suffer. And explicitly standing publicly and saying that in a press conference, to me, is that right there exactly shows you that these issues are connected and that public sector workers care so deeply and so incredibly, because they're doing this work every single day. And they know that the end effect of that is that folks get clean water, or that, children in schools get taken care of appropriately as education workers, right? So I think where we have work to do is building genuine long-term coalitions with communities. And I don't think we always do that as well as we could, right? I think sometimes those things just kind of get thrown together at the last minute, and they're not really that grassroots, and they're not really that real. And there is a lot of work to be done in seeing that these are actually bigger struggles and expanding our horizons and the way that we do organizing and the way that we do work, so that there are meaningful and like mutually reciprocal relationships that allow us to not just have a short, fight and say, okay, so there won't be privatization of water in Niagara today, but like actually, how can we have better water delivery across the entire province and for Indigenous communities, for example, that don't even have clean water right now, right? And so these are the possibilities of broadening these struggles and ways to do it meaningfully, which I don't always think we're so good at right now. And I think there's a lot of room to work on that.
We just want a general strike.
Hell yeah.
Fuck all that. Come on, I don't have time for that, Katherine. I want to hear, if we win, we'll call a general strike. That's how it works, right?
But it does take work, right? It does take work. And like, I'm hopeful that this convention and the coming together of members and like trying to digest these very real issues and figuring out a freaking game plan for how we win, because that's the most important thing. What the hell are we doing to win, to turn this back, to actually win? Like, we need massive investments in public sector in this country, right? Like, we need free public services. Like, there's just so many ways that these services are being monetized, treated like the private sector, and there's just so much incredible work to do. And I think we have to like really actually think big and dream big and try to and start figuring out ways for how to do that. And I am hopeful that this convention moves us in that direction. And the worst that's going to happen is it doesn't. And we continue what we're doing right now. And it's just going to take another 5 years for people to realize, hey, you know what? This isn't freaking working. We need to do something different. And I just don't want to have to wait that long, because like Krista said, people are losing their lives because of the way that cuts are being made in the public sector, and also just like people not having access to social programs and to just like basic fucking human needs that we are more than capable as a rich society of providing for everybody.
Mm-hmm. The latest cuts to safe consumption sites just came to mind when you said, people will die. It's just the most glaring example of like cause and effect and immediate. So that may not be related to your particular union, but it's what came up, and it's right across the board.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it was when he announced it at AMO. I think that was not last summer, but the summer before, because municipal workers have the library committees, right? And if folks aren't using at safe consumption sites, they're going to the library. And I think even with saying that connection to other workers who aren't as educated, and just were like, well, what does that have to do with us? Well, our fellow library workers that we're on this committee with are experiencing the direct blowback from that legislation. And I think continuing to educate and tie that to members is something that, like, I think Katherine and I are both just nonstop doing. Because those issues are worker issues. That's a worker issue. 1,000%. That's a worker issue.
Yeah, we have no third spaces left anymore, right? So the libraries do become that public space.
Yeah, and CUPE also represents workers that were working at some of these safe consumption sites, right? And there was work being done around this that I was aware of about maybe a year ago. I think there was a bargaining unit that was bargaining in Toronto where one of these sites had just been closed. So, yeah, this is the unfortunate reality of what happens when we don't have that union power, is that these changes are being made, right? And who these are our family members who are dying from overdoses, right? Like, these are working class people that are, again, our family members.
Yeah. The issues are many, the enemies are few, right? If we could just get everyone pointed in the right direction, it wouldn't seem so overwhelming, perhaps. Let's do some of the where, what, and when. You mentioned it's in a few months. When is CUPE going to elect a new leadership?
May 27th. I think our convention, I believe, is May 27th to May 30th. And throughout that whole process, there will be elections for the president, secretary, treasurer. There's 4 VPs, 6 member at-larges. There's also equity seats that are elected within equity caucuses as well during that convention. So lots of elections throughout that whole entire convention. I believe it is May 27th to May 30th.
And I think some of the sectors, the representatives that sit on the executive board from the sectors, are being elected at sector conferences as well. So some of these elections will be happening and have already happened outside of the actual convention itself.
Well, I'll be sure to pay attention because we often talk here on the show. We lament, where is this? I joked about it, but like, where is labor? Where is this general strike? We always have these moments where Doug Ford does something off. And we're like, this is it. This is going to set everybody off. Everyone needs to get pissed about this. And it's so interrelated. And, we're not there yet. And a lot of people don't understand how unions work. Frustrated that they actually are replicas of society and that they're not these politicized spaces full of radicals like we'd love them to be. So, but we don't really know what that work looks like to get it done. So we'll follow you, we'll watch this campaign, and then when you're in a position to show us exactly how that work's being done, we'll call you back and you can talk about all those successes that you're racking up doing this work a little bit differently this time. Is there anything you didn't get to say that you would like to say?
I want to quickly go back to when we were talking about the structures of elections. And I think that's why it's important that rank and file members just get engaged because of our kind of electoral structure. So if members aren't engaged in our union democracy, those decisions of who represent us get concentrated at the top. And I think with that, we become less responsive, less effective, and less tied to the members. So I kind of just wanted to go back to that because that is a big part of our platform. Getting members engaged and recognizing that the power that they have as workers, as CUPE members as well. Because what's happening in their local can affect what's happening in Ontario, right? And educating rank and file members, I think, is incredibly important, or it's a false sense of democracy in a way, right? So getting them equally empowered for these CUPE Ontario elections is important for sure.
And I think that also makes me think of, just reiterating to people, you don't need to hold an elected union position to actually move things forward in the union, right? Sometimes we just have this idea that oh, it's about this union position. It's not. You can do the work, and you really should be doing the work of organizing around particular issues in the workplace, right? And the most effective power of a union comes from the workplace, right? So you don't need to sit on the CUPE Ontario Executive Board to actually make change within the broader workers movement, workers struggle. sometimes folks forget that. And it's like, whether I win an election or I don't win an election, the work is going to continue. I'm still going to keep organizing to make things better, whether it's in my workplace or in any other capacity. Mm-hmm. Being elected to a position does not equal doing effective work and leadership work within the union. And I think it's important to remember that.
That is a good reminder. And I'll be sure to link some related episodes, because we do have one there in the archives where a guest came on and talked about bringing motions forward through your locals and how to best get involved there and to tie in local organizations to that process, so that you're bringing ideas from the community as well as from the workforce. So yes, very good point, Katherine. I'm so glad you folks came on. I haven't touched base with Katherine in too long, but yeah, folks are interested, especially in this little niche that is my audience, where there is a lot of folks from Ontario who are heavily invested in labor politics, who see Fred leaving and are in despair, and so they want to know what's going to happen to that union. And I think they were going to be much more hopeful, having heard from the two of you and knowing that, you've also got other comrades that you are hopeful about. So I appreciate you taking the time to share it with us, and best of luck.
Thank you for having us on. And yeah, we also hope for the best out of this entire convention, and hope to hear other voices saying things that are similar to the lines that we're thinking along. And Jessa, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to have a voice through your platform.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.